Okay, so I've got a lot of stuff on the backlog, if you will, that I want to knock out of the way, so we'll be doing that for now. Let's start with Power Rangers SPD for Game Boy Advance, courtesy of THQ and Natsume. Based on the 2005 season of the same name, which takes place in the near future, where an alien emperor named Grum is commanding his armies to attack Earth, and it's up to the B Squad SPD Power Rangers to save the day. No mention is ever made of those A Squad folks, which is probably a good thing considering their eventual fate on the actual show, but that's not relevant to the video game itself. So SPD, much like most other Power Ranger games of the past, is a side-scrolling action platform game where you guide your Power Ranger through a number of stages, occasionally fighting grunts such as Crybots and Trubians and doing some platforming bits. A lot of these stages has you making your way to the end of the level, but some will end with a boss fight and some will even require you to seek out a number of items before being able to clear the level. The game comprises 8 episodes, which comprise various stages, most of them comprising the platforming bits, but there are also some variations from the norm that we'll touch on later. Much like the previous year's Dino Thunder game on Game Boy Advance, you don't get to pick a ranger to play as. Instead, each level gives you a ranger to play with, which is unfortunate. However, unlike the previous year's Dino Thunder game on Game Boy Advance, Rangers aren't assigned to levels arbitrarily, but rather because it suits their particular talents. See, in addition to slightly varied attacks that are purely cosmetic more than anything, each Ranger has a unique genetic ability that's consistent with the source material. Red Ranger Jack, for example, can pass through certain walls, Yellow Ranger Z can duplicate herself and inflict additional hits, Blue Ranger Sky can create a force field that requires smart application to see any worthwhile use, Pink Ranger Sid can punch really hard, and then there's Green Ranger Bridge, who has radar sense for those fetch quest stages that I don't particularly care for. Now, just giving each ranger their own unique power, which drains this power meter underneath your health by the way, is enough of a nice touch and certainly does a good enough job of implementing a bit of lore from the series it's based on, but each ranger also has an additional move they can pull off to move around. Jack can wall jump, Bridge and Sky can double jump, and Sid and Zeke can execute an evasive roll by pressing down and B. As a result, none of the Rangers have a crouching attack but can drop down platforms, and that's about it really. Aside from the main platforming bits, SPD also offers a couple alternate gameplay styles. One is a missile command type of game where you control a Delta Runner and must defend the city against missiles by aiming shots with your targeting reticule. There's also another mini game where you control the SPD dog, whose name I don't recall, and must reach the end of the track before time expires, all the while avoiding various obstacles that will slow you down and drain you of health. It's something different from the usual formula, and hey, it works. And also, it's not pipeline. So that's a big plus right there. And then there are the Megazord Battles, which are thankfully straightforward compared to other games, but feel a bit more lackluster. You can punch, you could kick, and you could block by pressing down on the D-pad, which goes against basic instinct in this kind of playstyle. And if you fill your meter, you can enable a special mode where you attack with your sword. Beyond that, you have no additional special attacks, no super moves or finishers of any sort. It's just punch, kick, sword, and that's it. It feels a bit basic, but at the very least it is playable without gimmickry or horse manure, and that makes me more than satisfied, shall we say. Power Rangers SPD has the makings of a really great game, but ends up being a merely decent game at best. Each ranger is distinct due to their different abilities, and the levels that they're placed in make good use of these abilities even in the simplest manners. Of course, it limits the replay value because of the lack of choice, and being stuck with specific rangers for specific levels without the option to choose another in order to give the gameplay a little more depth makes the game feel less than it could have been. Regardless, this is a substantial step above the previous GBA Power Rangers offering, in that there are more levels to play through, and they're mostly unique levels that play similarly in terms of concept, but it's not the case of let's recycle the same 4 or 5 zones over and over and over again like Dino Thunder was. Control is fairly basic and functional enough to be playable, the overall challenge, at least on the normal setting, is adequate but nothing too taxing, and the different play modes such as the Missile Command-esque rounds and the dog running rounds are serviceable distractions from the norm. It's not all fun and games though. The occasional bits where you stop and kill enemies to progress isn't the most exciting thing, especially when the core combat is somewhat bare bones, and the enemies you're contending with are somewhat stupid, but at the very least they work. SPD has a password feature and 3 skill settings for more fun, I guess. In terms of visuals, they're fine, I guess. SPD opts for smaller characters compared to the previous games, which gives you more playfield, and they animate smoothly enough. They look like the characters they're supposed to depict, the Megazord bits look pretty decent, and the racing bits, which is more than just the dog you're controlling as it turns out, I don't know how I missed that. Probably the dog stood out more. Aren't too badly rendered here. They scroll smoothly enough, the frame rate's fine, no complaints in this regard. I will say the added lightning effects for certain cutscenes is a nice touch, which I thought were well animated, somewhat unique, good stuff. Audio-wise, it's passable. There are some folks who think the musical bits in these Game Boy Advance Power Ranger games are top-notch stuff, but honestly, they've always felt a bit meh in terms of quality. I like that each Ranger has their own unique stage theme and they're kind of okay, but generally speaking, the music is of a somewhat forgettable quality, which is unfortunate because usually a Natsume developed game usually has kick-ass music. One could point towards their old NES mainstays like Shatterhand or Shadow of the Ninja, or even their Super Nintendo outputs like Ninja Warriors, Wild Guns, or the various Power Ranger games for that console. But the music in these entries have always been bland at best, forgettable at worst. No theme song or anything like that. Sound effects are okay, not much more than that. For what it's worth, Power Rangers SPD is probably one of the better GBA offerings, at least within the context of the franchise. The gameplay, while still not up to the level of even the Mighty Morphin games of the 16-bit days, is competent enough with a few unique bells and whistles to give it some flavor. The various side games are complementary diversions, and the Megazord fights are simple, straightforward, solid fare. Like I said, this had the makings to be something really great, but is not quite on that level. As it is a rather serviceably adequate little platformer on the Game Boy Advance, and while it's not great, it's not that bad either. It's merely okay.